this is Adrian Welcome back to how to properly format your screenplay. In this video, we're going to focus on parentheticals or parenthetical directions. So let's talk about where to place them. It's 3.1 inches or 16 spaces from the left margin to no further than 5.5 inches. That's the range. If you're using a screenplay format, everything's already, margins and spacing set already, so you don't have to worry about that. Just letting you know. So what are parentheticals? An actor's instructions or personal directions, the subtext or attitude, emotion of the character. So, parentheticals always appears under the character's name, who is speaking, and it always appears in parentheses, not spaced, so directly right under. No single space, no double space, right under. Press enter, boom, right there. Always begins with a lowercase letter, and never begins with the pronouns of he or she. Never, never in caps. So let's dive into this more specifically. Let's say you have a character that's speaking and you want to give them direction, but you don't want to, start a whole new line of scene description or action description or narrative description. You just want to give them a quick little direction to do, or an emotional direction. That's why I made them in red. Or an attitude direction. You're not actually telling them to do a lot of things. Like, you don't say, oh, they pull out the gun, he points it at whoever, and then he pulls the trigger, and then... No. If you need to do that, then just go to the space where you're starting a whole new, narrative description and put it in there. But if you're describing, an attitude or an emotion, then you can put it in there, in parentheses, never capitalized. Let me give you an example. So let's look at the top. Penny. She's talking. Well, hello there, right? But you mention underneath in parentheticals, brightly. Now, what does that mean? That means that Penny is going to say, well, hello there, in an upbeat mood. That's also letting the reader or the audience know that Penny, maybe she's a happy-go-lucky girl. Maybe she's always looks at the bright side of life. Not a lot of stuff gets her down. She's a very happy, person. Based on that direction, based on that instruction, that has to do with the emotional way of her saying it or her attitude. At that moment, she's very happy. Or just in general, she's, an upbeat person. So normally, without that, Penny would just say, well, hello there, or however you want to say it. But because you say brightly, the character is now going to say it probably like this. Well, hello there. Hey guys, what's going on? Very upbeat and happy. Charlie's like, hi Penny, you look busy. Okay, and maybe in the next thing she says, she's like, yeah, but I love work because I love life. You don't have to keep repeating it. If she continues the dialogue, you don't have to keep putting brightly, 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 brightly. You don't have to do that. Just put it once. And then, she will say the line however it's meant to say. But you just put it once. Unless in the next couple lines something happens to her where she's in a bad mood, then you could say, grumpy. Then she's like, the next thing she says, instead of saying it brightly, she says it angrily, like, yeah, what do you want, Charlie? And then Charlie's like, hey, what happened to you? What happened to your bright personality? And then she's like, yeah, but the boss is giving me a hard time. You see what I'm saying? So unless her mood changes or her emotion changes, or you want to give her a certain instruction. So, let me give you another example. Dorothy is talking, and you want her to say it disparagingly. What shall we do? So she's like, what shall we do? Disparagingly. So, another example, Frank is talking, and this is, instead of saying, based on attitude or emotion. You give him, an actor's instruction, personal direction. So he's saying this dialogue. Oh boy, if I don't find a way to pay my rent this month, I may be living on the street. Now, you could be saying this to some other guy named Bob. Hey, Bob, like he's talking to Bob. He's like, oh boy, if I don't find a way to pay my rent, and he's talking to Bob. But in this case, because you put a parenthetical, letting the reader know, letting the actor know, that he's saying this to himself. He could be in a room by himself, all depressed or whatever, and he's like saying to himself, oh boy. Or you could put it like he says it to Bob. Or let's say there's 5 characters in the scene, and Frank is talking to the whole group. But then he specifically wants to talk to one of the characters. So instead of saying Frank, instead of saying in the character description, Frank walks over to John, grabs him by the arm, pushes him out of the room, shuts the door, and looks at John. Then you have him say whatever you want him to say to John. Or you could they're in the same room with 5 guys. Frank says, to John. In parentheticals, you say to John, and then you have him, say whatever he wants to say to John, and while the other 4 guys are listening. You see what I'm saying? So another example, Splasher. What kind of weird name is that? Splasher, grunting. So he's saying Jesus Christ's balls. I don't know what the context is, but he says grunting, so he says it that way. And then under the next dialogue, he says pained. So I guess he's angry or he's upset, and he's like, get out, you little shit, or whatever. So another tip I want to give you is don't overdo it. Every line of dialogue that a character says, don't put a parenthetical. This is fine, grunting or pain, fine, whatever, to get your point across. But then if he says something else, don't say, whispering, or then the next line he says angrily, or the next line again. Don't keep doing it. It's just going to get annoying. It's going to get cluttered. So don't overdo it. Some other examples. Here is an example of instruction to the actor. Personal direction. So you got this knight, Sir Gallant. He's talking to some evil wizard, and just before he says his line, he is given direction to unleash his sword. So he pulls out his sword, and then he says his line: Your reign of terror ends here, evil wizard." You see what I'm saying? So you want to emphasize this is a very important scene. This is very important dialogue. How do you emphasize it? With the parenthetical. How? He pulls out his sword. You give the character, you give the actor instructions or a personal direction to emphasize the importance. A dramatic, moment is, exaggerated or pointed out to let the audience know, hey, this moment right here, this is the pinnacle moment. I want to make this moment super important compared to the other moments. How? Well, he's going to unleash his sword, and he's going to say his line to the evil wizard like a boss. See what I mean? So, another example of parentheticals, you say Rich is, this guy Rich, he's talking on the phone to somebody else, somebody else in a different room, in a different house, on another phone. So, he's talking into the phone, so into phone. And then he says his dialogue, "Hey, it's Rich. You got that surveillance report?" Could do that. You could put into the scene description, you could set up, 2 characters talking on a telephone, intercut between them. That's a whole different video. But I'm just letting you know, you could either put it in the character description. Actually, he says it. Rich pushes the buttons on his phone as if stabbing a mortal enemy. So he's mad. He's like, he needs to find out some information. He has to find it now. So he picks up that phone and he's punching the number with his fingers. He's poking the phone because he is desperate. He he's, short for time. He wants to get that information now. So and then he's letting, the instruction of the character into phone, and then he says his dialogue. Here's some other examples. Dora, she says her line, "You are such a pain, Dick," a guy's name, whatever. But if she says it sweetly, so that means, she says it, you're such a pain. So like she's doing it playfully. She's doing it in a nice way. She's not angry. If you want her to be angry, then in parentheticals, say angrily. Another example, Dick is talking and he's like, where'd you go, ... Dora, come back, I'm not finished. So instead of saying it calmly, he's calling. He's like, where'd you go? Hey, Dora, come back, I'm not finished. You can even say yelling if you'd like. But in this case, he's calling. He's saying his dialogue in a calling way. Instead of saying, where'd you go, Dora? Like, instead of being face to face with her and just talking normally, hey, what's up, Dora? Where'd you go? Hey, come back. Where you going? He's calling to her. She's walking away probably. Who knows? So he's like, yo, Dora, come back. Where you going? We're not finished yet here. So here's some good examples. Hope this helped out. Now I want to give you a few parenthetical description tips. These are some that I use. Maybe that'll help. Let me oversimplify parentheticals so they can be considered either personal direction or emotional or attitudinal direction, which we talked about. Tip number 1, use parentheticals sparingly to enhance character or tone of a scene. Don't overdo it. Another reason, okay, we'll get to that, but tip number 2, write it in a new scene, in a new, describing a scene description, action description, narrative description. If it's too much of something you want to stick in parentheticals and is just too long, just make a new scene. If it looks too cluttered on the page, that's why I say do not overdo it. Don't put too many parentheticals because it'll look, especially when characters are speaking in dialogue, it'll look too cluttered on the page. That is going to hurt you when you send your script out or someone is reading it, an agent is reading it, he turns to the page and he sees this elaborate long dialogue between two characters or multiple characters, and then like every single line of dialogue is interjected with some sort of parenthetical description or direction or emotional parenthetical, and it's just too cluttered on the page, and he's going to be like, what is going on here? I can't even follow where all these parentheticals, or it looks like a mishmash of just jumbled up words and stuff on a page. I'm going to skip reading this screenplay. I'm going to pass, throw it in the trash, move on to another screenplay. So that's another big reason you don't want to overdo these parentheticals. So if you can't say the direction in 2 or less words, then just start a new scene description. If there are more than 2 actions in the same parentheticals, then either cut one out and move to a scene description, keep one in and move the second one to a scene description, or just cut one out completely and choose the best parenthetical meant for that scene to move the scene forward. And if you, for example, when I mentioned tone, when it says here, use sparingly to enhance the character or the tone. Let's say you're having a dialogue between 2 characters and it's like real fast, back and forth, like there's high tension, there's a lot of action going on, it's high stakes, there's an action scene and you have 2 characters going back and forth on a speeding car or a car chase, or a speeding train, or a bomb's about to go off. There's a high tension going on in the scene. Now, if you have the characters, spewing back and forth fast dialogue, but then the dialogue is slowed down with all these parentheticals, it's going to ruin the tone. This high-speed chase ain't going to be so high speed anymore. This bomb that is about to explode, time is going to run out because you got too many parentheticals. See what I mean about tone? So here's some examples of how to cut out the parentheticals or just move them to, a whole new scene description. So you have the evil wizard and then that knight, Sir Galahad, they're talking. So the evil wizard, he's laughing. And he's like, ha ha, Sir Galahad, ha ha, brave to the last I see. And then you have another parenthetical where he says to his henchman, pointing at Galahad, seize him. So you go from an attitudinal, emotional parenthetical of him laughing, he's not taking Sir Galahad serious, to an actor direction of him, looking or turning to his henchman, to the evil wizard's henchman, and then he points. So you got two directions in there that was followed beforehand with the laughter of the emotional direction. So what you could do is you could just keep the laughter, the laughs, make the evil wizard say his dialogue in a non-serious laughing manner, but then just, cut that double direction of to his henchman pointing at Galahad, just cut that in half. Keep to his henchman, which is fine, and then just start a whole new action narrative description that says the evil wizard points to Sir Galahad. And then go back to the dialogue where it says evil wizard continued, in parentheses, and then you just have him say his line, seize him, instead of having that big block of parentheticals. You clean it up. It makes it easier to read. So, hope that helped. Here's another example. Here's the original scene of Luigi talking to Mario. So Luigi sniffs, so he's like, hey, what's that? So he's smelling something. Then, right in the same dialogue, you have another direction. He turns, and Mario follows suit. So Mario also turns, and Luigi says, smell? So, and then you have the scene description, down in the jungle to the south. There's a patch of scorched, smoldering earth, at least a mile wide. Then you have Mario saying his dialogue, but you have a huge parenthetical, which is scowling, his eyes narrow, genuinely angry. Now that is a perfect example of way too much happening with parentheticals in the scene and the dialogue, just making it so cluttered that I'd have to reread this like 2 or 3 times to figure out who is turning, who is following, who is sniffing, who is scowling, so it's going to take me a while to read it. Or you could rewrite the scene in a clearer way. So Luigi sniffs, and then instead of saying, he, turns, Mario follows suit, no. You keep just sniffs. Then you start a whole new character scene description, and you say, Luigi turns and Mario follows suit. Then you continue the dialogue with Luigi saying, smell. That's a little cleaner. Then you have the scene description, down in the jungle, blah, 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 smoldering earth, at least a mile wide, whatever. Then you start a whole new action description or narrative description. A scowl takes over Mario's face. His eyes narrow. You don't put that in parentheticals. That's a whole new line. You make it nice and clear. Easy to read. A scowl takes over Mario's face. His eyes narrow. Then you go back to Mario, adding a parenthetical, genuinely angry. And you have him say his line. Wario! He yells Wario angrily. You could say, yells angrily. Wario! See how I cleaned up that scene? It's not cluttered. That's going to really help you out. So please take these tips and apply them to your screenplay writing. Here's one last thing I want to touch on: parenthetical directions. So, not used to describe actions unless those actions can be described in a few words. So like I mentioned before, if you want the character to do a lot of things and it's not going to fit in that parenthetical, then just start a whole new line with action description or narrative description and put it there. Otherwise, if you can say it in one word, 2 words, or like a small teeny tiny phrase, then fine, put in parentheticals. But if you can't, start a whole new line with narrative description and just describe what is going on in the scene, then come back to the dialogue. Don't end a dialogue block with a parenthetical. So, like, you have them talk, and then he's like, okay, I'm done talking to you, bye. And then, you finish off with angrily shuts door. Don't do that. Actually, if you want him to have an action and he's done talking, start a whole new line of narrative description, action description, and say it there. But don't ever finish off with a parenthetical. That's a rookie mistake, unprofessional. You have him finish the dialogue and then you start narrative description. John walks out, fuming, slams the door, almost breaks the door off the hinges, blah, 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 whatever. End scene. You understand? So, can use parentheticals to indicate to whom the character is speaking when that is not clear. So, like I said, I give an example. You have a guy talking to 3 people in a room, but he wants to focus on one person and say something to that one person. Before he says it, in the parentheticals, you say, to Ben or to Veronica. If he's talking amongst 2 girls, but he wants to tell Veronica and leave Jessica out, then you say, to Jessica. But then he wants to talk again to Veronica. The next thing he says in parentheticals, just before he says it, to Veronica. Very simple. Here's some examples of a phrase that you could squeeze in parentheticals. So this guy Frank, just before he talks, the parentheticals are looking at the dog. Okay, that's fine. You could get away with that or you could just say to dog. Simple. Or if the dog has a name, to Rover. Looking at Rover. But looking at dog is fine. And then he says, cheers, my friend. I have a feeling this is going to be a great night. Fine. Next you have Jack. He's like, he says whatever he says in dialogue. I'm sorry, Cy, for all the gay jokes. But you want him to specifically say it in a certain way. So you give a parenthetical saying quietly. So he's like, I'm sorry, Cy, for all the gay jokes. So you can actually say whispers. In parentheticals, you can say whispers and have him whisper the entire line. Maybe he's embarrassed. He doesn't want other people to hear. Maybe, Simon is not out of the closet yet and he doesn't want other people to hear. So that's why you say quietly. You could say whispers, like I said. So, and then Jack, he says to Cy, whatever. Simon says, it's fine. And then Jack says, no, it's not. So in parentheticals, you want Jack to say, no, it's not, firmly. That means, he's like, he wants to get his point across to make sure Simon understood that he is sorry. So you want to, make the audience, let the audience know this moment, Jack, he is a good guy. He wants to make sure Simon, understands that Jack is sorry. So you say in parentheticals firmly. He's like, no, it's not. So that's the way he would say it. Another example, Frank, he says his dialogue, but you give him parentheticals visibly shaken. So that implies that Frank, you know, he went through some traumatic experience in the scene. So the way he says it, he's like, wow, I can't believe you would do this to your own son. You see, based on that parenthetical, you could see like the way he says it, he is traumatized. So another example of Bill, just character direction instead of an emotional or attitude type parenthetical. This is literally just telling what Bill is doing in parentheticals. Turning to face Frank. Turns to face Frank. Fine. Or looks at Frank. Or to Frank. But you specifically want him to turn and face, face to face. So you could do that. That's fine. If you don't want to, again, you could make a whole new line of describing, of scene description or narrative description, and make it a little bit more dramatic. Like you could say, Bill turns to face Frank, and then Frank, or no, for example, Bill turns to face Frank, they are nose to nose, more dramatic, okay? So then Bill says whatever he says as he turns to Frank. Great. Then another example, Frank, he's about to say some dialogue and you put in parentheticals, low but definite voice. So he says it in a low way, I guess. I don't want to hear it, May, or I don't want to hear it, Ma, please not today. So it implies that he's going to say low. He's like, I don't want to hear it, Ma, please not today. So there's some good examples. Hope they helped out. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share this video, comment down below. If I confused you with anything having to do with the format, just let me know in the comments and I will clear them up, no problem. Hit me up on Facebook and Twitter. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, because there's a lot more videos coming out on formatting, but these are the basics. Remember my motto and apply it to your screenplay writing, where story comes first.